Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today is a May 2nd. Believe it or not, we're in May 2nd edition of the MSP Initiative Live. Going to go through some general housekeeping that we normally do, and then we'll get into the good stuff. So, of course, MSPinitiative.com. This is where everything that we do here is kind of presented, right? Sessions, which we're on right now, are recorded. They get loaded here as podcasts and video formatted sessions. So you can always go back and see the many sessions that we've done all the way back to 2020. We have our own event coming up in person in Denver, August 14th and 15th, called MSP Community Minds. This is our way to give back to the community, where we're bringing these and other experts from around the sandbox so that they can get you past a PowerPoint presentation and workshop you into something that's more than notes that you never follow up with after a conference. So various topics we'll talk about. We'll start talking about them here in a little bit. But MSP Community Minds, mark your calendars, 14th, 15th. By the way, absolutely no cost other than to get there for MSPs to join us. And then we have our block parties, which have a mind of their own. We have the Enable Prague conference coming up next week. So if you happen to be traveling there, you'll see us. We'll be there. We're doing a block party the second night of the conference. So, very excited to first time to cross that city off the list for us. Then we have DattoCon in Dublin, which is at the end of May. We have the MSP Community Boat Party around Taylor Business Group's Big in August. There's one that's missing from here on the list, which is DattoCon Miami, which is, I believe, in October. And then, of course, the big one at the end of the year in Orlando, which, if you missed it last year, All American Rejects performed live. No joke. We have videos and pictures to prove it. So, new band this year. It's coming. We're working on it. But hopefully this time not in a hurricane wind situation. That would be good. We have community offers. So these are companies that have raised their hands, and there's like 3 or 4 more coming in here. Special offers for the industry. Industry calendar, which kind of gives you all of the events going on that we've consolidated across all of the various entities doing events. And if we've missed any, feel free to submit them here, and we're happy to add them. That being said, that is MSPinitiative.com. And that's all the good stuff that we have going on. Feel free to check it out. Today, we have 2 new guests to the show. We have David and Brian from Crushbank. And, Crushbank's actually been like an evolving thing. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But David and Brian have a pretty cool story about, their journey through MSP land. And I always like to start there because it kind of gives us like a foundational point of, hey, why did you come up with this idea and where do you think it's going to help? Well, it started off with they were in the trenches like everyone else. But I like to learn about that, and then we'll get into like the cool stuff, right? Which is where did that lead? So I don't know which one of you wants to take the starting salvo, but I'd love to hear a little bit of background on your journey through technology land, maybe where you got started and how did you get to this point today?
Dave, why don't you let it rip?
Sure, I'll give it a start. So thanks, George. First of all, great to be on with you. Really appreciate it. Love everything you do for the community. So thank you for that. As you said, we both started as MSPs, different companies. Our third partner, Evan Leonard, him and I were business partners at an MSP called Chips Technology Group. We actually started it back in the early 90s. Just sold it actually last year. We knew Brian through an industry peer group, the True Profit Group. So we were in that group together for, I don't know, Brian, 12, 14 years, something like that. Until Brian got wise and exited the MSP space. And I stuck around for a few years afterwards. So we've known each other for a while. Back in, I'd say early 2017, IBM opened up technology access to their Watson platform. So their AI platform that I was familiar with back from 2011 when they used it to win the Jeopardy Tournament of Champions. They opened it up and I wanted to play around with it a little bit. And I thought it'd be a really cool use of the technology to make it available as kind of a resource on the help desk. So my original vision was to build a product and train it on all of the technology we support. So feed it everything from Microsoft, Cisco, Citrix, SonicWall, all the documentation we support, and make it a resource that could sit on the help desk next to all the texts. Again, I was running one of these businesses, and I used to joke that the dirty little secret that nobody knew about managed services was that we spent most of our time just looking up and Googling for answers. In fact, I can't tell you how many times we got yelled at by a client because someone actually did it on a customer's machine rather than do it on their own machine in the office. So we thought it'd be a really cool use for the technology. At the time, Brian had sold his business. He was out. We were out playing golf somewhere together, and we had a conversation about it. I'll let you pick up, Brian, a little bit from there.
Yeah, we were waiting for a bus down in North Carolina, and I said, "You doing anything interesting?" He's like, "Well, I'm messing around with this Watson AI engine and potentially integrating it into ConnectWise." I was like, "All right, well, once that becomes more than a prototype, give me a ring because I'm past my sell-by date." So as David had noted, we'd known each other for a while, and Dave, I'll let you sort of dive back into the David and Evan and myself had known each other for a while. I'll let you dive back into the sort of early phases of Crushbank itself. But what I saw quickly, having sold to a large multinational corporation that was run, had a national footprint for an MSP, was that every problem we had as a Boston-based MSP was just amplified as soon as you put it into 10, 12, 14, 18 different cities, right? With different systems, and even the collapsing of them into one instance was a challenge as well. So the vision was originally sort of, a very controlled, concise ConnectWise instance. And I wouldn't even call it an ask, but my input as we sort of started talking through the organization was like, we really need something that can address this problem. This was before the billions had been plowed into private equity, but it happened. So I guess it was fortuitous / maybe we saw it coming, but I knew that was a problem for me and for my employees and for my customers, even more so. Like that was the hardest part of the whole thing. And if we could be a part of making that experience better, then we would not only be successful, but we would solve a real pain. I'll get back into what I think some of the challenges are, but Dave, I'll let you carry on a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was really more about getting a little bit tired of customers getting frustrated with us every time a tech asks them a question about their network. So that lack of customer intimacy, customer knowledge about knowing what's on there in their environment, what systems they're using, what platforms they use, things like that. And secondly, being a tech myself, it would always drove me crazy that every time we went to solve a problem, we would kind of start from scratch. So you're essentially starting every issue as if there's no background, no previous experience, no knowledge of how you've fixed it in the past. And it just became a really difficult way to run and manage a help desk. So we just knew there had to be a better way. So, we just kind of got the idea. Originally, like I said, the idea was to put just third-party content knowledge. I used to joke that I wanted to train Watson to become an MCSE. And we did that early on. It was capable of answering those questions and solving those problems, but that's just not realistic in the support world that we live in. You need customer specific information. You need historical information from your organization. So I think that's when the product really started to evolve. That and the things that Brian's talking about, really seeing the opportunity in the M&A space. We started to stitch all of that data together and put it all in one secure place where you could search across everything and find it no matter where it lives. So that was kind of the turning point for us fairly early on. But once we realized, I think a little bit more so how people would use the technology that we were putting together, we really started to see the vision evolve.
Interesting. I mean, AI is a pretty big conversation these days, right?
Yeah.
ChatGPT seems to be like comes up all the time now. And then, I think Google just launched their competitive version. I heard something in China is coming out to maybe try and compete as well. It's a little bit of an unknown, right? Sure. I see Brad Gross on the line. Love when he joins us, by the way. Brad, welcome back from Vegas. Hopefully everything went well. So I love when we run into the feeds, right? The Reddits and the Discords and the Slacks and the Facebooks. And then people are like, oh yeah, I went and had the AI write my MSA, and Brad had a pretty cool, few things to say about that. Or I had them write a script, and you see the RMM vendors trying to, kind of attach ChatGPT to speed through some of that. And obviously the information that's coming back isn't 100. Okay. Like we actually don't know where that information comes from per se. They kind of curated that from a lot of different places over the internet, I'm sure. So like I start to be hesitant when somebody's like, write me a script to install X. Like who's actually validating that? Is it just an L1 guy who types in a sentence and then just presses send? That scares me a little bit. So like the AI stuff, and even like in my world, right? Speech recognition, it's never been 100%, right?
Sure.
Like accents and dialects and all that come into it. And like Watson, by the way, is like an early AI, solution, right? Like it's probably been around longer than most of the ones that we were talking about.
Oh yeah.
So I guess there's this big question of where does this go, right? Like you guys have a long run here of trying to, an early adopter of this type of technology. But I guess the concern is, some people are like, hey, does this displace me? Does the L1 tech disappear? I'm not so sure. But like, do you, and then of course, with all things being said, every time somebody creates something for good, people can use it for bad, right? So like we've seen people use the AI stuff to like create malware or bad things like that. So like zoom out for a second, right? Obviously you've built a company around the idea of AI. Are you seeing this thing? Where does it actually help for real?
Yeah. So a lot of stuff there, a lot to unpack. So at the risk of being an Uber nerd, I'll dive into it a little bit, but I won't like bore your audience to tears. So what you're talking about with ChatGPT, incredible technology, very cool platform. It's what we call generative AI. And to your point, the technology is incredible and what it does is amazing. One thing people often overlook is that it's not incentivized to be right. There's no component of generative AI that says it has to be correct. It just has to sound right. And George, you hit the nail on the head. Like the thought of letting a level 1 tech create a PowerShell script that they don't know what it does or how it works, and then letting it deploy it to 10,000 endpoints would keep me up all night. Like I can't imagine a company doing that. Now, if you know PowerShell and you can read the content of the script and make sure it's right, ChatGPT will write it faster than you, as long as you can QA it, maybe test it out. So I like to say that it won't displace AI in general, but generative AI specifically won't displace people. It'll make people that use it better than people that don't, right? So in your world, if you need to write copy, for marketing, you could work with a generative AI engine and you can spit out the copy faster, but you're certainly not going to push out a press release that you don't read. You're not going to launch some product announcement without reviewing it first. Same thing in the IT space. What we do is not really generative AI, although we do have some components of it. What we do is what we like to call semantic search. So what that means is we're not generating new content. We are using AI-powered algorithms to find the right documentation or the right piece of information that'll help you solve your issue faster. So for example, if you have a user guide or a run book or an SOP that talks about how to fix a problem, that'll come up really quickly. And you'll have to read through it and it'll have the documentation for you, but it won't generate it dynamically on the fly. If you have the answer hidden in a time entry and a ticket note somewhere that nobody ever thought to look for because there's no search in most of these ITSM platforms, we'll pull that up. So really, we're more about cutting through all the noise. Our average client probably has 1 million documents ingested in our system. So we can cut through that really quickly and pull the top 20 answers that you have to still look through. So you need a level of expertise, but we're bringing you that information really quickly, really efficiently, right when you need it.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. You guys came from MSP land. It's a little bit disorganized. And to be honest with you, data is kind of fractured into, I don't know, 20 different systems.
Yep.
It's never all in one place. And, for all the documentation tools that have come out, the IT glues and the IT boosts and the hoodoos and all, like, that's great that like, you still got to feed the machine now. Like it doesn't just automatically get all your information where it needs to be.
So you need to go ahead, Brian.
Yeah. No, I let you finish, George, because I was going to build on that.
Yeah, I mean, so like part of the other problem is like because of the lack of standardization in a lot of places, like usually things grow over time, right? An MSP kind of starts immature and then like slowly over time they realize I can't scale this thing until like we actually all read from the same place. The problem is who went back and scraped everything into that one place. probably didn't really happen, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a couple numbers that I think support. And first off, full stop, you're right? Like that's the challenge for the MSP. And there are a couple numbers that support that speak to sort of like being overwhelmed. I even say like MSPs are awash in data, right? And they're even awash in data sources. So that just makes it worse. And we have some really sophisticated clients that have noted, like I spent a whole bunch of time putting these, I'll just call them SOPs or whatever in SharePoint, IT Glue, whatever. But then my problem is my people can't find what they need when they need it. There's a point of impact when it's useful, and there's 99% of time when it's not. And so how do I make sure that that is surfaced at sort of the point of impact when that particular resource needs that document? So 3 things that I think speak to the sort of the growth of that problem. 90% is the amount of data on par that is unstructured in all these systems, right? So that's a big number, right? Obviously, but not that includes time entries, of course, that includes SOPs, PDFs, Word docs, all those things that are not in a like a structured field where I can query on a password or an IP address or whatever else, right? So most of the value that I'm building becomes really hard to find when I need it. 50% of time is just spent looking for data. So let's just pick a random number and say, and every CEO that I've ever talked to has said, yeah, even if they don't, like, yeah, that sounds right. So if I'm paying a guy 75 grand or 50 or 120, it doesn't matter. Half their salary plus benefits is going towards professional Googling, right? Like doing the best they can to get the data from some uncurated, maybe untrusted source. Doesn't mean it's not effective, but it's inefficient at best. And there is some risk that it's not exactly what you want at that point in time. But people get really good at it, but you pay these people the salary that is high based on their technical skill sets, and half the week they're not even using their technical skill set. They're just trying to find their way to the data. 2 other notes. CompTIA just came out with a study that was kind of mind-blowing a week or 2 ago. 46% turnover in MSPs. That means you're building a new MSP every other year. Like that's amazing. And even if you say, well, we're not that bad, if you're 30% of that, like if you're way better, you're still 18, 25%, like that's still a huge loss of institutional knowledge on a regular basis. And the industry's growing compound annual growth rate about 14% year over year. So even if you don't have that challenge from a turnover perspective, you do have it from a growth perspective. So every person that comes in, whether they're a replacement or net new, comes in with a 0 baseline, right? Like they don't know anything about Apple Beverage Company or what this is and what that is. So the ability to get them up to speed is a huge burden on the organization as well. So that's a lot of words and numbers, but like the summary of it is the problem is real and getting worse, or flip it on its head. David said companies that use AI, forget Crushbank for a second, companies that use AI are going to replace companies that don't. Like that's really the thing. How are we doing things differently in 23 and 24 versus 21 and 22 that leverage what we've built wildly more effectively than what we did? Not just moving the needle a little bit, but like how do we really extract the value out of that 90% of stuff that we probably couldn't find? Or if we could find it, it's because David's worked here for 21 years or 3 years and he knows the tips and tricks how to find that, but Evan or George don't. They've been here for 6 months or 6 weeks, and how do I turn that into value? So you can see how there's huge rooms for efficiency, even with minor leverage of some of these new systems when they come in, because it's just not sustainable to keep throwing bodies at the problem. And that's one thing we get no disagreement on, right? Like you can't keep throwing human capital at this problem.
Well, I mean, again, as everybody's coming from the space, we know how hard, like, I love the 90-day probationary period. There's no 90 days in this industry. It takes months. It takes 6 months to actually get somebody to the point where like, I'm gonna take the training wheels off and like be on your own, right? Hold on your own. And part of the reason why is everybody does things slightly differently, even, right? Like, let's say they've come even from another MSP or another IT, internal IT department. Like, you still got to like explain how you're doing things different than maybe where they came from. So there's this pretty large learning curve, let's be honest. And on the fact of professional Googling, yeah, it's a thing. I mean, and like, to the point where like the customers now started to do their own Googling and maybe broke it worse before they actually even got to you, because they think that's what you're doing. And to be honest with you, part of the reason that I think that's gotten worse is the whole remote work from everywhere kind of thing, right? Like before, you would like everybody would kind of be in the same area, and like you could like go to the other cubicle and like say, hey, have you seen this before? I feel like that's lost on the screen time. Like they just are on their own island.
Yeah, there's no collaboration anymore, and when there is, it's got to be so formal because it's email back and forth or it's chat back and forth. You can't just turn to your colleague that's done this before and ask them for advice or a hint or where to find something. So to your point, everyone's kind of working in their own island. There's no accountability and there's no collaboration. It just makes it really difficult to train your people and get everyone on the same page.
And even as you look at some of the numbers that have come in, like as the economy has softened, quote unquote, not in terms of hiring in this space, it's gotten like the jobs continue to grow. And ask anyone, I haven't seen anyone in this space say like, yeah, price for talent has dropped and I have people banging at my door. It's changed a little bit in the last 8 months, but the reality is you're still pretty much beholden to the behaviors or the requests of some of these people of potential employees. Like if somebody wants to work from New Hampshire, you're gonna let them work from New Hampshire if they're pretty good at their job at the expense of what David just alluded to, right? So it's hard to put that genie back in the bottle in terms of creating that that prairie dog experience where you just throw a question over the fence and you'd solve problems. Now you need a better way to solve for that.
And the price, that cost's not going down either, right? So we always used to joke that 6 months or a year at an MSP and you become incredibly valuable to either another MSP or some sort of an internal IT organization. Well, now that every company is willing to let you work remotely from wherever you are, and you're getting that trial by fire at an MSP, you're building those skills. It becomes even, that's why that number is at 46% from CompTIA. It's just impossible to keep these people now.
Well, I mean, if I said 6 months before, that's what the idea that you're all kind of in the same place.
Right.
It takes even longer when you're doing the remote thing. It doubles it probably, to be honest. But at the end of the day, here's the thing, right? And we've all heard the concept and the theory around centralizing data, and now you need less level 2, level 3 expert, kind of targeted guys. You could worry about more, kind of L1 guys because now they're more efficient and this, that, and the other. I love the marketing behind that. I mean, but the realization is it takes a lot of effort to get things to a point where that's real. And we know that MSPs are largely overtaxed on time. There's nobody dedicated in a lot of these companies to, clean it up and do technical document writing and like absorb all the information and structure it properly. And listen, there's third-party tools that help that, but it doesn't, and even the automated part doesn't really truly work. But so zooming out, right? So you took an AI style platform and you said, I'm going to absorb data from all of these places. And I'm going to bring it together so that instead of using Google, which is the internet's concoction, you're literally Googling through your own information.
Right. Yeah. So it's basically AI powered enterprise search, with the difference being that we also enable searching inside the PSA or ITSM platform. And most of these, even the really good ones, don't have a very good search functionality because there's so much data in it and it's so unstructured. So we bring it all in and we layer that the powerful search capability on top of it in one place. So yeah, you're right. There's no one dedicated to updating documentation. Most companies do a mediocre job of onboarding because you just want to get that billing in there and you're so overtaxed supporting your existing clients. So we try to make that easier again by making all that data available wherever it lives.
100%. Had a message come in saying, what about co-managed IT? Are you giving them access to this search tool, or maybe that's dangerous now because now that's kind of internal versus external documentation?
So yeah, we have a bunch of clients that do the co-managed IT, and we built the functionality for them to be able to open it up to their customers. So if you manage, I don't know, say a large community bank and they have 4 internal IT people, you can set them up as users and you can limit what they have access to. So you can maybe let them search their documentation, but not your ticketing history, or maybe you give them everything or a subset of your documents, whatever the case may be. But that functionality is built into the system. Absolutely.
That's cool. I mean, restricting maybe some of the proprietary internal stuff's probably important, right? I'm not
Yep.
exactly trying to give all of my secrets also.
Well, yeah,
Uh,
like internal notes are not going out in that, right? Like we don't, there's enough issues. You're not putting that in there. But if you've got SharePoint docs, you want to share those with a co-managed environment, you surely can. You got IT Glue, you got ConnectWise or any other documentation. You can essentially extend kind of the downstream IT concept that ConnectWise
Good.
had.
And what's nice is you don't need to give those people, those users access to all your different systems. You could just give them access to one platform that then gets them all the documentation that you
Right.
want them to have.
that's cool because on average, how many systems are you seeing per MSP that they're pulling data from? 10, 15, 100? I don't know.
No, it's probably more in the 5 to 7 range. It's the ticketing system. It's a SharePoint. We pull in Teams and Outlook, so everyone's got that, obviously. It's whatever their configuration management database is. So we'll say IT Glue for argument's sake, and then whatever documentation they have on their network. So
Well, remember, Dave, that those are the native integrations we're pulling in, but there is back-end data from
Yeah.
Ovid or whatever else that
That's true.
finds its way in there. So probably the number of sources that indirectly, George, get into these data lakes, and that's what we do. We build like a knowledge management data lake for each organization. Indirectly could be 10 to 15. It would be 4 to 5 native integrations. But you pull LionGuard in, for example, and you can find that it tripped me, excuse me, you said, I didn't do anything, right? Like, but the guy Googled it last time. Like that timeline will show George changed the IP address yesterday, right? And we'll show that as a document right there. So that's like a perfect example of taking what is often too much data to do anything with at a moment and sort of surfacing what you need when you need it, and then kind of burying it back down again when it's not relevant.
So this is interesting then, because like now you have this macro view, right? Are you able to kind of show the trends of what the most accessed pieces of data are, so that maybe like as an organization, somebody could finally at some point when they get some breathing space, like look at this and say, if we filled in some of these gaps, maybe we get even better.
So yeah, so we do a couple of things. So we do reporting on what the data sources and specific documents people are searching and they find most valuable. We even let them tie that back into a ticket, so you can really kind of create that flywheel effect. So let's say there's a knowledge base article that lives in SharePoint that's really useful and someone uses it to solve a ticket. They can click right inside a Crushbank and it'll tie it back to the ticket and it'll put some notes in there for you. We also, like Brian mentioned, the concept of knowledge management. We're trying to help our clients grow and fortify their entire knowledge corpus. So when they're doing a search, for example, say they're working on a ticket and nothing good comes up, or maybe some ticket note comes up with someone that did it, there's a button right in the UI that lets you click and says documentation request. And what that'll do is it'll generate a ticket. It'll automatically pre-fill what you were working on and what query you did. It'll let you write in some notes, and then it'll put it on a board or just send an email to someone. Now, again, it still requires the time and effort to update that documentation, create that documentation, but at least you're building an almost a to-do list, to your point, of all the things that need to be done. So in real time, rather than saying, I think we need documentation for the new EMR platform that the medical clinic put in. Well, no, now you're seeing in real time that no one documented the VPN connection for this law firm that was updated 2 months ago, things like that. And then it opens up the opportunity, like you said, let's say you have someone working overnights or weekends. We always, being in New York, we always had a staff after hours and weekends, but we'd get 1, 2, 3 calls a week and almost nothing on weekends sometimes. And this person's sitting around. Here now I have a task list for them that you can build in real time based on crowdsourced. And when I say crowd, I mean your staff, crowdsourced feedback of what's really in demand.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting back thinking about the challenges of the day-to-day stuff and time burn. We talked about this, right? So it should really help that. And time is money. We talked about this too. Get you closer to the marketing dream of, I don't need a level 2 or level 3 stuff if level 1 guys have access to the actual information they need in the moment, right?
Yep.
And then, I assume this will just continue to grow, right? The more data points and sources that you can feed into the machine, the more powerful this gets.
Yep. So we're expanding. We're constantly adding third-party documentation. So pulling in sort of the stuff that you do Google for now, pulling that in and making more of that available. We're working with some vendors on that. We're building out some features that will allow companies to share data amongst themselves. So let's say you're in an Evolve group together and you're willing to share the documentation that you've built, not necessarily the client documentation, that's not that useful, but some tips or tricks or troubleshooting processes that you've put together. So we're going to let people, so it kind of becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy where everyone's adding more data in, it's all curated, and the collection just keeps getting better and more powerful.
That's very intriguing. So how, zoom out, right? How do you price this, right? Because what if I have a 2-man MSP or a 20-man MSP or a 200-man MSP? Is it based on data sources, employees, customer count? How does the math work?
Yeah, so it's based on employees, George. It is the best proxy for the cost that we actually have and the value that we believe we provide. So we make it pretty simple where we're not going down to endpoints, right? So when someone's like, I got 10,000 endpoints, that's great. And we don't price by data inputs, because this is a terrible analogy, but the idea of we don't want to incent people to not put data in. If you find the worst thing you can do is say, well, I'm going to keep this out or whatever it might be, because then as soon as you don't have that thing that someone knows exists, you can't bake 3/4 of a cake with no vanilla extract or whatever silly example you want. You need all the things. And if somebody knows it's there, they're like, this AI solution, it's no good. So you got to get the data in there. You got to incent them to get the data in there. And then we do price it off based on employee count, because a lot of what we do from a knowledge management standpoint is AI search, which is what we sort of talked about, but then a lot of workflow enablement, right? So you can do a whole bunch of text analytics reviews before you go contact any client to see what has been the root cause of these tickets over the last 90 days. What sentiment trends do I see? It's not perfect, right? It's just one tell, but in terms of the language or the engagement of the clients over that 90-day period. What type, subtype, and item, we sort of automate these things. How do I want to build assignments and the off of the automation of tickets, automation of the classification of tickets, I should say, because we can go in and read all those and say, based on the type, subtype, and item model we have, let's make it this. Oh, and by the way, let's review it on the back end to make sure when you close the ticket and somebody said, I have a Citrix issue, but your tech went in and said, it's not a Citrix issue. It was a password reset. They got locked out 3 times then because it was a 2FA, whatever, right? We'll read that, recategorize it, and then you'll have good data off of this, right? Same thing with auto budgeter. We have a really cool scenario where we'll identify what this ticket should be but reading similar tickets over the last 6 months or year or whatever, based on a whole bunch of parameters you put in. We found one that was estimate of 8 hours and the guy spent 3 hours. So the obvious the other way around, hey, you spent 4 hours, it should have been 1 hour. Why? This was interesting. It turned out it was server down, and the ticket said rebooted server, all set. It's okay, not all set, right? You took care of it right then, but the problem is bigger than that, right? So if I'm a manager, now I can look at sort of exception reporting that says, this guy said it's all set in 30 minutes. The system, not always right, but the system said it should have been 8 hours based on other server downs. Let me see if there's something that I need to close a loop on here. So it's a long way of saying you're creating some real value out of the broader unstructured data set that's very hard to manage to. That's why we build the whole thing off of employees.
Yeah, everything you just said, some of this takes a lot of effort, manually taking data sources and smashing them together in order to actually get there. And again, who is the dedicated resource that, obviously the bigger the company, yes, that probably that role exists, but you get to the smaller or medium and smaller guys, they just don't have the funds or the time to dedicate a role to actually getting to meaningful data, right? So that they can do more than muscle through all of these things. One came through. Can the AI go beyond searching for problems? Can it make the data better?
So we are working on a few things that address that exactly. So one of the things that we're building out now, we talked a bit about generative AI. So one of our first forays into that will be essentially reviewing all the documents that you have, all the tickets that you have on a particular topic and creating a knowledge-based articles for you around it. So let's say you get a dozen tickets in the course of a month or so around, resetting accounts for some line of business application. We'll see that trend. It'll set off an alarm. We'll pull all those tickets in and we'll turn that into a standard operating process where you know how to then fix that problem. So that is something that we know is really a powerful use of the technology. It's something that we're building. So it's not in there now, but it definitely will be. So that's one example of how it can make it better. Like Brian mentioned, we take the human aspect out of categorizing tickets. So you don't, whether it's needing to know what the technology is, so having to pay someone that's fairly expensive to understand what the ticket's actually about, and then to Brian's point, redoing it again on the back end. No one ever spends the time or money on that. So we take that out of the equation and let the machine do it. And budgeting, same thing, like putting a budget in for tickets before someone starts working on it is incredibly powerful from a management standpoint, from a customer support standpoint, customer service standpoint, client stat standpoint. So that's a very difficult task for someone to read a ticket, understand the technology, understand the client, know the systems, and be able to estimate the budget on it. Again, nobody's willing to spend $75,000, $100,000 a year on someone to do that. So having the machine do it, I think, again, makes the data better. So we are holistically doing things that make your data collection better. Yes.
It just hit me, but the fact that you can go backwards in the data, right? Some people have, I don't know, 10 years, 12 years, 15 years of ticketing information that's just sitting there in the database. You're now literally being able to double down on the stuff that already happened, right? In the past, these people may not even be here anymore. You're being able to pull that into something functional.
Yeah, exactly. So, when, again, I use my experience when we ran the MSP, we had one or two techs that knew a bunch of line of business applications really well, and the tickets always ended up on their desk. And when they left, that knowledge was gone, right? There was no knowledge transfer, there was no training, and it would have been starting from scratch. Fortunately, it was after we had already built this solution, we were using it internally. So we were able to unlock that really intelligently. Speaking of going back, one of the cool features we do, I mentioned the categorization, we do let our clients go and put that in historically. So let's say you wake up one day and you embrace Crushbank and you decide you want to let the system, the AI, do your type, subtype, and item classification in the ConnectWise Managed world. It doesn't have to be from that day forward. We'll let you go do that historically. So you have actually a foundation of solid data to work from. That's really important for us. That's really useful in the M&A world as well. If you're stitching two different MSPs together, whoever the acquiring company is or the surviving company can say, hey, I want to know historically how you supported these customers, but your type, subtype, and item make no sense to me. So I'm going to go back and reclassify them the way we do it. And now you have some reporting and you understand who your best techs are, who your clients are, what they're calling about. So really intelligent way to make that data valuable day one.
Yeah. How about just must change? I'm sure it's everywhere. It's like 90% of your tickets are must change. I wonder why.
That's our punchline.
Well, I mean, it's true. Let's be honest, right? And like you can try and make those fields mandatory, and they'll just pick the first ones, and everyone, like they never spend the time to get it. No. They're just worried about the next one. Let's be honest. How does this, like? There's other companies that have popped up in the sandbox, right? We've heard of PIA and MSP bots, and other people are using AI type technology. Is this different than those, or is there overlap?
Sure, I'll give that a shot. So there's always a little bit of overlap, but I think we're definitely different than those. Those are platforms about automation and efficiency and actual performing the work. Mm-hmm. Really, really cool, valuable tools. PIA in particular, I know fairly well. Obviously, RPA, robotic process automation for MSPs. Great tool, but only when you get to the point where you know what needs to be done. So in other words, a ticket comes in, someone needs a password reset. If you have an RPA for that, great, you fire it off. But if you need to figure out what the solution is, or if someone actually needs to understand the systems and what they're looking at, that's when you need sort of a knowledge management solution on top of that. So that's where you need to figure out like how to do this, how to address it, how to attack it. And hey, if that can then turn into an RPA, that's great. MSP Bots, same kind of thing. MSP Bots has some really cool reporting, some automation around managing text, but not as much around the tech workflow. We have a really great relationship with both of those companies and a bunch of other ones in the sandbox, like you say, because what we do makes their platforms better. So PIA, for example, I believe a lot of their processes are triggered off of type, subtype, and item. Well, if you're not properly categorizing them, those RPAs aren't going to do you much good. You're just going to spend the same amount of time you would solving the problem trying to find the RPA. MSP Bots has some really cool reporting around like employee efficiency and productivity, but they want to be able to gauge it against the time budget. So if you're not filling in the budget on your tickets, some of their reports aren't as valuable. Cognition 360, same thing. So, I mean, we certainly compete, quote unquote, compete with those products because we all require MSPs to spend money, but we do have different solutions that I think complement each other fairly well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, junk in, junk out, I guess is the best way to categorize all of that, right? If the data doesn't get you to the resolution, then it's just sitting there doing nothing for you.
Exactly.
Yeah, true. I mean, they are really complementary is the summary of that. Like here's a use case that Daniel and I have talked about with a couple collaborative or similar clients at MSP Bots. That is like, he's like, if I show you a dashboard that says you're 22 minutes in on a ticket, that's like an equation without a denominator, right? Like if I show you a dashboard that says you're 22 out of 15 minutes into a ticket, I know I should be paying attention to that. If you're 22 out of 90 or 3 hours, 90 minutes or 3 hours into a ticket, then I know that you're early stage and that doesn't ring any bells for me. So there's all sorts of ways, if you know the denominator, to make that time spent per ticket in a management dashboard way more valuable. David mentioned Cognition 360, same thing. Like everyone, if you're building your reports or your value off of data, like they have customers who are saying, like directly, when can I automate the data so that Cognition 360's reports, which I love, can become more trusted? Because you either got to fix it on your own or you got to have a machine fix it. This kind of gets back to where we started. Like, what should the machine do and what should the machine not do, right? Like automating type, subtype, and item is a good place for the machine to play. $40,000 a year kids doing ChatGPT searches for how do I write a PowerShell script and shove it out to 7,000 endpoints is a bad place for automation to play. So there's a complete story here about how these organizations play together that I think is getting a little bit better communicated. Yeah, even though I stumbled over it when I tried to say that, it was not great English. But like the whole message of all of us trying to essentially say, like, you don't need to use all of us, of course, but we all kind of push the MSP in the similar direction, and we do all work together. So you can do this or this first. Well, that's up to you. But the idea of automation and machine learning to drive efficiency through the business and reduce churn and reduce escalations and those sort of things for a client, like that's a real story. And we know each other, and we're trying to do a better job in 2023 than I think we even considered previously as a community, as an ISV community and an automation community, getting a complete message out to everyone. It's like, yeah, no, Crushbank has a key piece about knowledge management, AI knowledge management, so that everything you therefore build off of that can be automated and 100% populated, right? If not 85% trusted, so to speak. Because you said even your voice, like human voice, is 92% accurate, right? Or some number like that, even like maybe lower. We drop a lot, never mind. So that idea of like they all have a place to play, we all have a part to play and sort of driving efficiency back to the MSP. And last comment on that, like we're not making the employees go away. Every once in a while, someone will joke like, "Can you make my employees go?" Like, no. And if we could, that would be bad for you, right? Because then there is no reason for the customer, for your customer to use. Like there is still value. We just want your employees to be more efficient. We want them to Google less. We want them to use their intelligence. We want them to follow your unique process. We want, like, that's what we want for the 10, 20, 50, 250 techs that you have. We just want them wasting less time.
No, I mean, listen, that helps on the other side of the conversation, which is if I'm struggling to bring competent people into the organization, I may not have as much, burning need for that person to come in. Number one. Number two, probably takes the stress level and the burnout level down, right? Because your people are able to like confidently get to a resolution without like stumbling into, 8 different tries to try and get it to work. So there's definitely a good there on the human being side, because let's face it, like you guys have both been through selling MSPs and hopefully, making something worthwhile to talk about afterwards. But everybody we talk to about that topic says that your labor rate is very scrutinized in that whole, kind of due diligence phase.
Mhm.
And we all know that the profitability for MSPs, like everything's done on net, right? It's not like SaaS land, right? Where like they look at gross a little bit more closely, so like your net bottom line needs to actually be, worthwhile in order to get your value out of the business, right? And we say all the time, and it's worth saying again, even if you're not going to sell your business, if you run it like it's ready to be sold,
Totally.
you
Run
will
it
be
like you're gonna
very
sell it.
happy.
Yeah. No, I like that. And like how many people can I cut? Like, even if forget the joke about I don't want any people, it's not really about how many people you can cut. It's about, can you grow slower with good revenue, right? So I add 10 grand, 20 grand, 50 grand MRR. Can I add headcount at a lower rate than I have previously? Can I delay the next hire 6 months to 12 months? And you can, and that's the win. Or with a little churn, can I maybe hire back slower? Like, that's where you move the needle and you just hit it. Like, if you're talking 6, 8, 10x on net, like that's a lot of money every dollar you save. You save 2, 3, 4 points on COGS, like that's times 10 or times 7 or whatever the market is bearing, right? Like that's a lot more.
100%.
Or it's good for you, even if you're gonna, like you said, run it like you're gonna sell it. So
And I suggest everybody do that because, with more money, you have more flexibility, right? Whatever you do with your profit dollars, that's up to you. But, the more things you can invest with, I mean, obviously that helps you in the end, as long as it doesn't crash completely, but I digress. So the next question was, what does it take to deploy this AI thing? How long does it take to get results after this is plugged in? Like, what does that process look like?
So basically, we pull all the data. It's fairly light lift for the customer. So we set up the integrations. Everything's done via API, so we're not disrupting any of your systems. So we meet with you. Our onboarding team meets with you. We get all of those connections set up, and then we kind of go away and start ingesting data. And depending on the size of the organization and how much data we're talking about, that's anywhere from 7 to 30 days. So that's kind of the budget we give there. We would figure that out up front. And once we ingest the data, we apply our initial machine learning models to it. So we've built models based on IT support, content, information, language, basically the language domain of IT support. We lay that all on top of it, and we essentially then turn around and make it available. So within, give or take 30 days, depending on the size of your data set, your data is ingested, it's enriched, it's trained a bit with AI, and it's made available to you. So it's a pretty painless process for customers onboarding. Again, not comparing it and not saying anything negative about the configuration management databases, but it's not like you're going to need 700 hours up front to get started. We do all the heavy lifting for you on the back end.
Is there such a thing as their data was so dirty that they couldn't get good results from this? Or
I mean, look, if your tickets are full of garbage where you're not putting any details in it, like, Brian likes to say, my computer couldn't computer, and then the tech puts in, I fixed the computer, like that's not going to add any value to anybody, right? You can see who worked on something and maybe you'll find it. So yeah, it is possible, but generally speaking, I like to say, like, techs are not great at being well organized or diligent. So again, like Brian's example, if someone changes the IP address on a firewall or opens a port, it's 50-50 at best. They're going to go back and update that documentation, but it's a pretty good bet they'll put that in their notes in their time entry. So we like to say we love bad data because it lets us sort of dig through it and make it available where there's no other way to do it. But sure, if there's nothing good in there, there's, you can't get blood from a stone. So,
well, but the other side of that is there's no time like the present to start fixing it. Like, if you've been in business for 10 years, we have the ability, like David noted, to sort of identify missing like documentation requests and start populating it. Like, now there is a reason. This is like a fairly unspoken truth, but like there's no real reason for techs to put good notes in tickets until now. right? Like, yeah, their boss wants them to. And if there's a billing issue 6 months down the road or whatever, 6 weeks down the road, it's nice to have details, but no one's ever using it because no one can ever find it. So you do have this sort of paradigm shift where we're saying, oh, now this is going to be valuable, so we want you to take good notes. But like that shouldn't be a blocker to adopting something that creates value from your corpus. It should be an initiative to drive to drive that behavior. It is now worth everyone's while. And one of our most gratifying emails came from a level 1 end user who said, literally, okay, now I get it, to his boss. Like my good time entries here will be to the benefit of my coworkers, to the benefit of the clients. I won't get calls about companies that I have to work on all the time, or Slacks or whatever. And then I'll benefit, like down the road, if everyone behaves accordingly, I'll get the same value out of these time entries in the future. So if, when do you start to get value? Because it's unstructured, it's very easy to set up. Like David said, you can get value really quickly with a couple nuggets here and there where you find something in a time entry that you wouldn't have found. Like first month, you'll get wins. You won't get huge returns, so to speak, but you'll find something. It's then kind of month 2, month 3 where the behavior is built and people are used to starting there every time. You build simple best practices, like you can't escalate a ticket without going into Crushbank and putting a note in there, which is essentially saying you can't escalate a ticket without checking all the data really quickly that we've already built, right? Like that's a good rule. And once you get that embedded in the behavior, then you get real like dial moving returns on escalations cut in half, like that sort of stuff, right? Where I'm not, why would I be escalating? Most of those are back to my 50% number, right? If 50% of things are 50% of my time is spent looking for data, it stands to reason that 50% of my tickets I escalate are not over my technical head, but I just can't find what I need. So dropping that in half is a totally reasonable outcome that we see, going from like 70% to 82 or 85% first touch resolution, first call resolution, however you categorize it. Like we see that in the first 6 months or so, and that's kind of fun. We also see sort of not low, you can get nothing if you don't put anything into it, but low single digits, 5, 7, up to low 20s of average tickets closed per tech per month or week or whatever your metric is, just sort of output. It's a little harder with average handle time because we're not going in and saying like, I don't know whether if you close it in 10 minutes faster, are you taking 10 minutes off the amount of time you put in, or are you just moving on and giving yourself, I don't care. It's just a harder thing to manage the behavior. But if you close 9 tickets instead of 8 in a day, that shows up. And that's kind of the data analysis that we work through with our customers. And in the first 3 to 6 months, we're seeing that stuff. Not the first 1 to 2, but halfway through the year, like you've got real data.
I mean, listen, the fact that you actually proved this inside of an actual functional MSP to start, right? So this wasn't just a concept that you're like, let's see if this actually works. There's value there, by the way, because a lot of people have seen products out there. You're like, did you actually have anybody look at this before you? Okay. So that's number 1. Number 2, I assume that now you have a really good base of history and back record where you can say, hey, we've onboarded X number of MSPs, and like we're starting to see the trend of the results go in the right direction, right? So I think that that's pretty good information. The fact that you've actually gone past your original theme of what the solution does, and you're starting to backfill these other concepts. Like it's an evolving product, which is great, because like we all know what happens when people just stop developing their products, right? They're like, oh, it's good enough, but the technology industry never stops. And so that's important, that like the feedback loop is there and you're actually building out the product. This is exciting, guys. I mean, I think that the idea of AI, obviously more recently, like a lot of people are still trying to understand what's the tangible value. But here you've actually already, I think, proven that the time savings is there, the stress, reduction of finding the information is there, cleaner customer experience, right? Because now we're getting to the crux of things. Hopefully the business sees a financial benefit, right? Because we're not just throwing bodies, which, as we know, can get expensive, especially if everybody's coming from big tech, making stupid money coming into IT land. And like, you're like, well, wait a minute, what did you do? And they're like, oh, well, we didn't really do much. Well, then why is your salary asked this? But I digress. And I think bottom line is, a lot of people, and we've all been there, by the way, I call it trade show fatigue, right? Where you like walk down the trade show booth, you bought 80 things, 6 months later, they're not even turned on, right? And you're like, what did I buy all this for? Because they just don't have time to do it, right? The fact that like once the initial setup's done, your kind of widget starts spinning, and then like eventually, like the results will get better without somebody having to necessarily go and touch it. I mean, I think that it's almost like a springboard into the actual thing working for you.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. So obviously we've been doing the trade show circuit for a few years now, and it was great. The first year or two, we were the only booth that had AI listed anywhere. So it was like kind of moth to the flame. Now, to your point, everyone bakes it into their product in some way, shape, or form, which I think is great. I'm obviously a huge advocate of the technology and really appreciate what it can do for us. But as consumers, which MSPs obviously are in that scenario, you need to be educated, not only by what you're buying, but also by what your customers are looking at. So I think it's really important as an MSP to get educated on what these technologies are, what they do, how they work, and how they can help your business. I just wanted to circle back to one statistic I'll leave you with that I think that we like to manage by, or that we think is interesting. So a few years back, we did a data study of what caused churn in our customer bases. So it was not just based off my MSP, it was based off of a bunch of MSPs in the peer group we were in. So we think fairly high performers. And the thing that moved the needle for the only metric that we could see that moved the needle on churn was number of touches per ticket. So in other words, a ticket bouncing around. So whether it's being escalated, or you're reaching out to a vendor, or someone else has to get involved because they solved it before. When that number at a customer peaked its head above 1.3 touches per ticket, churn started to go through the roof. So that's to your point about not always needing level 2s, level 3s, making the data available. It's really about getting the person that can solve the problem, the information they need the first time, so the customer doesn't feel like they're bouncing around. So really, it becomes in that way. Certainly, there's a financial implication in the money you can save on scaling and on hiring and closing more tickets, but really keeping tickets and improving that customer satisfaction, which is a real cost, but it's not always a documentable cost, I think is important as well. So I just wanted to mention that.
No, that's an interesting metric, by the way. 1.3 touches per ticket. I mean, could go on to another hour on this topic, but who really, forced this whole idea, why the end customer gets so frustrated? It's all the big, the credit card companies, the cable companies, all these companies you call in and like you got transferred 8 times to another department and you starting from scratch and you're like, can I just record this, or what do I got to do?
The most infuriating thing in the world. Yep.
Yeah, that's so damn frustrating. Where do people find more information, talk to somebody, see information, maybe book a call? Where do they go?
If you go to our website, crushbank.com, it's all right there. It's got a quick request a demo comment. There's a bunch of good content. It was just refreshed, so it's as good as it's ever been. Maybe it'll be better soon, but for now, it's pretty good. There's a lot of content in there, and a couple case studies, I believe, as well. So some good firsthand content from some clients, probably some well-known clients, and an easy way to put your hand up and ask for a little bit more detailed information.
Awesome. Guys, I learned a lot on today's call, by the way. I mean, I knew a little bit, but it's kind of like made it very clear. This is what the value is. I know a lot of people have a hard time articulating that in 30 seconds walking past the banner somewhere, but no, this was good. I really appreciate just the fact that like really good companies usually come from people who like lived it, right? I mean, you guys were in there, you know what it feels like, you know the pain, the struggle, and you know what a good outcome is, right? And I think that, big picture, the younger the MSP, probably the more willing they are to adopt new things, to test things out. But I think the biggest thing I walk away with from here is, and maybe you guys, here's my tip to you. Remember the Arnie Bellini modern office, like little, you should create the modern help desk, right? All those companies that you create combined value with, if you guys create that story graphically, I think that would be a good idea, right? Because then people can understand where the cross connects are and like all of a sudden better together, right?
Yeah.
My 2 cents, but I think the biggest thing I liked coming away from this, and like if I were to rate it, but like the number one biggest thing is like extracting the historical information that all of these people had already been pumping into the system that you're using, and like now making that available and useful now today, right? Even if those people aren't here, like to me, you literally gold sitting in the pile. You just didn't even go and do anything about it.
Yeah, 98% of these tickets have been solved before, just not by you, right? So if it is you, great, you get lucky, you mow right through it. But if it's how you build a pod, all that sort of stuff, but you just can't control for that. And that's where the squeeze gives you a really good return in terms of juice being worth the said squeeze. So
100%. Guys, I'm going to see you guys somewhere out on the road. I know you guys do a lot of
Absolutely.
events, and that's where we have time to actually like kick back a little bit, but I'm sure we'll see you somewhere soon. Otherwise, this session was recorded. I promise we will package it up and get it out so you guys can rewind. And then before you go to talk to these guys, be like, hey, at 22 minutes in, they said you can do this, this, and this. No problem. It's there. You'll see it at mspinitiative.com under sessions. Otherwise, a lot of history behind these people, a lot of background. I would, if you have a question, even if it's like, hey, you sold your MSP, what was that like? Hit these guys up. I think that's valuable information to learn from. So,
awesome.
George, thanks so much. Appreciate
you
it.
got it.
Appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Thanks
Cheers,
for joining.
everybody.
Catch everybody on the next one. See ya.
Take care. Bye-bye.